This video is on question 34 of the 2012 TSA paper, and here we're asked which option best expresses a flaw in the argument. And this is the passage that we're given. So we're first told that when police raided a London nightclub, which is known for selling illegal drugs, 9 people were arrested. However, says the author, everyone was led outside. These people were searched and photographed, regardless of whether they had drugs on them. Going to a nightclub is not yet a crime, says the author, and so it's a troubling breach of civil liberties that police should keep a record of these people who didn't even possess drugs. The author writes that many of us are more comfortable with dealers operating in the dark corners of nightclubs rather than operating openly on busy daytime streets. Therefore, we should accept that drugs will be sold in nightclubs and hope that they can be contained there. So that's the passage we're given. And what kind of sentences are we dealing with? Well, sentence 1 and 2 are background facts. And sentence 3 and 4 are reasons. We know they're reasons because they're used to support the conclusion, which we know is sentence 5 because sentence 5 has the word therefore. So let's try and understand the structure of the argument. So here I've isolated the reasons and the conclusion. So these reasons are used to support the conclusion. And what are these reasons saying? Well, the first one seems to be saying that civil liberties are a reason why we should accept that drugs will be sold in nightclubs. And the second reason seems to be saying that selling drugs in nightclubs, or drugs being sold in nightclubs, is preferable to drugs being sold on streets. Therefore, what? Well, therefore, we should accept that drugs will be sold in nightclub, according to the author. So that's the argument. And remember, we're looking for a flaw in this argument. And the move from civil liberties to saying we should accept it seems plausible, because perhaps if we don't accept it, then people's civil liberties are going to be violated when the police use their power excessively. But what about this reason? Is the author okay in moving from nightclubs being better than streets to saying we should accept that drugs are sold in nightclubs? Or doesn't it seem that we don't have to accept any of these things? That is, we don't have to accept that drugs will be sold in nightclubs or on streets. That is, the flaw seems to be something like this. Perhaps no illegal drug dealing at all is preferable to dealing in nightclubs and dealing on streets, and therefore perhaps we shouldn't accept either nightclubs or streets. This seems like a plausible statement of a flaw, and so let's look at the options to see if one comes close to this. So here we have our 5 options, and here we have what we have proposed as the flaw in the argument. So can you see an option which comes close to this? Well, option A seems to come close. This says that the author assumes that the only alternative to excessive use of police powers and open dealing on the streets is accepting that nightclubs sell drugs. And this seems to be saying the same thing if we put excessive use of police powers to the right of nightclubs. The author seems to assume that because selling in nightclubs is preferable to selling on the streets and excessive use of police powers, we should accept selling in nightclubs. In other words, the author assumes that these are the only possibilities. They miss the possibility that there could be no dealing at all, and that therefore we shouldn't accept selling in nightclubs or on streets or excessive use of police powers. So it looks like A is the answer, but let's check the other options. B says that it doesn't follow that by photographing people, the police abused their civil rights. Now, it's not clear whether this is in itself true. In fact, it seems plausible that by photographing people after leading them away, even though they haven't got any drugs on them, is a violation of one's civil rights. So we can't even be sure that B is true, let alone whether it identifies the flaw in the argument. What about C? This says that the argument uses one example of a nightclub where drugs are sold to go to the conclusion that nightclubs sell drugs. Now, even if the author does this, even if the author generalizes, they don't have to generalize. The argument would still work if it's limited to the one London nightclub that the author is talking about. And so, even if C is true, it doesn't do any fatal damage. Looking now at option D, this says that the argument uses both extreme and illogical steps to go from one nightclub raid to the unlikely prospect of open dealing on the streets. Now, this is not that extreme. Furthermore, One cannot say that the prospect of open dealing on the streets is unlikely, because that's where most dealing takes place, or at least a substantial portion of it. And so D is also, perhaps, just wrong. Lastly, taking a look at option E, this says that just because some people didn't possess drugs, it doesn't mean that they didn't take them. Now, this is true. Just because you don't possess drugs doesn't mean you haven't taken drugs. However, some drugs are illegal to possess, but not to take. And so the police would still be violating the civil liberties of those people who took those drugs. But moreover, just because some people are in possession of drugs and some people are taking drugs, it doesn't mean that some people are doing neither. That is, neither possessing drugs nor taking drugs. And the author said that everyone in the club was taken outside. So for those people who neither possessed nor took drugs, their civil liberties would still be violated. And so the point that E makes is irrelevant, which leaves option A as the correct option.